Welcome to Kunzy Podcast English, where heartfelt stories are told slowly, clearly, and with deep emotion. Today, you'll hear a story that feels like it came from a novel, but it's real. An elderly mother, after spending her whole life in solitude by the coast of Spain, finally decides to leave everything behind to follow her son to Australia, only to discover she's been abandoned at the airport. But that's not the most surprising part. What happened? Why did her son disappear? And how did a woman, stripped of her home, her child, and her trust, come to find a new family? One not made by blood, but by love? Stay with us as we unravel this emotional journey of loss, hope, and healing, only on Kunzy Podcast English. Part 1. Alone by the Galician Sea. Have you ever heard the sound of silence? Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that presses against your chest. The silence that used to be filled with laughter, footsteps, and a soft voice calling your name. Rosa is 61. She lives alone in a small cottage by the windswept coast of Galicia, Spain. A house not just made of walls and bricks, but of memories. She was born here. She loved here. She raised her son here. This place is her whole life written in rooms and shadows. Her husband, Javier, passed away 9 years ago. Since then, the house feels larger, not because it grew, but because everything warm had disappeared. The laughter that once bounced off the walls is gone, replaced by echoes of silence too loud to ignore. Her only son, Daniel, left for Australia when he was 20. It was supposed to be temporary. University, he said. He would come back. But life happened. Work, marriage, children, and then silence. The calls became rare. The emails faded. The postcards stopped. And Rosa remained, waiting. Each morning, she checked her phone for a message that never came. Each night, she prayed not just for his safety, but for his memory of her. She watered the flowers her husband once planted with love. She read old letters until the ink blurred with tears. She kept every drawing Daniel ever made, stored neatly beneath her bed. She wasn't angry, just waiting. But then one quiet afternoon, something changed, something unexpected. And from that moment on, Rosa's story would no longer be one of silence. It would become a journey, one of heartbreak, hope, and a light she never saw coming. Part 2. The Unexpected Return. Rosa had long given up on miracles. The kind of hope she once carried now lived only in fading prayers and folded letters. Yet on a quiet, windless afternoon, while watering the last marigolds her husband once planted, she heard it. A knock at the door. Not the wind or the mail drop. A human knock. Sharp. Real. And it stopped her breath. Slowly, cautiously, Rosa walked to the front door, her hands trembling. When she opened it, time seemed to stretch and stop altogether. There, standing under the gray sky, was Daniel, her son, the one who had once filled this house with laughter and then left without looking back. He said nothing. His shoulders sagged, a suitcase beside him. And then, quietly, he placed his hand over his chest in an unspoken apology. Rosa didn't need words. She opened her arms and held him tightly, not as a mother welcoming a prodigal child, but as a woman grasping what she never thought she'd feel again. Presence. Inside, Rosa made tea and set out a plate of almond biscuits she had saved for special days. They sat at the old kitchen table, and for a moment it was as if time rewound. Daniel looked around the familiar room and said, "It's all the same." Rosa smiled faintly and replied, "Only my heart is older." Then came the conversation that had waited years to unfold. Daniel spoke of work, the pressure, the fast-paced life that pulled him away, the guilt, the silence, the way he couldn't stop, but also didn't know how to return. Rosa listened. She didn't scold. She didn't demand. Her forgiveness had been given long ago in silent prayers. And then came the surprise. The offer. I want you to come with me to Australia. My daughters want to meet their grandmother. You'll have your own room, your own space, but with us, with family. Rosa froze. Her eyes drifted around the home she had spent her entire life in. Every photo frame, every crack in the wall told a story. Could she abandon all that? The very soil of her soul. Yet in Daniel's voice, she heard something deeper than words. A plea, a longing, maybe even redemption. Her heart trembled at the weight of the choice. To stay in the comfort of memories or step into the uncertain warmth of reunion. Was this the moment she had waited for all these years? Or was it the beginning of something she could never have imagined? Part 3. The decision to leave home. After countless sleepless nights, Rosa made her decision. Not because she wanted to leave the soil that raised her, but because she didn't want to grow old waiting anymore. She had spent years nourishing hope with letters and silence. Now that the door had opened, she knew she had to walk through it before life closed it again. Selling the house was not just a transaction. It was a quiet farewell to a lifetime. She moved from room to room, brushing her hand gently against the walls, whispering memories into the air. The living room where she and Javier sipped tea during crisp mornings. The kitchen where almond cookies once baked and laughter echoed. She packed slowly, deliberately, choosing what to take with her, not by value, but by memory. A wool scarf Javier had gifted her the year they married. Her prayer book, its pages worn soft by time, and a faded drawing Daniel made as a child, showing a mother and son holding hands in a field of sun. Daniel handled the logistics, booking flights, organizing papers, carrying suitcases, but more than that, he became present, fully, emotionally. "I'll make it up to you," he once said, eyes full of guilt. Rosa simply smiled. She didn't need apologies, only love made real in the here and now. The morning they left, the sky over Galicia was dull and heavy, as if even the weather mourned her departure. Rosa wore her brown coat and pinned Javier's brooch to the collar, a silent tribute to the man who once walked beside her. Daniel wheeled the luggage, always keeping one hand close to hers. At the airport, near the boarding gate, he paused. "Wait here, Mama," he said gently. "I'll be right back. Just going to get a wheelchair. 5 minutes." She nodded, taking a seat by the window, her eyes following the distant planes lifting into the air, each one a question, each one a possibility. Rosa didn't know exactly what awaited her in Australia, but she knew this. It was no longer the past she was living in. It was a future she had the courage to meet. Part 4. Abandoned at the airport. Rosa sat there, in a quiet corner of the airport, surrounded by a rush of strangers dragging suitcases, waving boarding passes, and reuniting with loved ones. She remained still, like a fragile shadow left behind in a world moving too fast, too cold. In her hands, she clutched a worn leather bag. Inside were the few treasures she had kept. Her late husband's handkerchief, a faded prayer book, and a drawing her son had made when he was just 8. That was all she had left after selling her lifelong home, the house where she was born, married, raised a family, just to follow a promise of being with her son again. Daniel had told her gently, "Just wait here, Mom. I'll go get a wheelchair. 5 minutes, okay?" She had nodded, eyes moist with both excitement and fear. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she'd lived long enough to know that joy can sometimes wear a mask, but she wanted to believe. She had waited years for this moment, Almost a decade of silence, of unanswered letters, of holidays spent alone rereading old notes and birthdays passed with only the wind as witness. But today, he came back. He hugged her. He smiled. She wanted to believe it was all real. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. People came and went. Planes landed and departed. But Daniel didn't return. Rosa sat, eyes locked on the automatic doors, hoping they'd open to reveal his familiar face. But they didn't. An airport staff member noticed her sitting alone and confused. Rosa explained, "My son, he said he'd be right back, just to get a wheelchair." The staff member smiled politely, then called for airport security, a middle-aged officer named Miguel. He arrived, calm and kind, and began checking the passenger logs. Then the truth came like thunder in a clear sky. Daniel had boarded the plane. Alone. Without Rosa. Without a note. Without goodbye. Rosa froze. Her heart didn't break all at once. It stopped. The world spun around her, but she felt none of it. She wasn't even crying yet. The shock was too deep. She just sat there, stunned, like someone who had been pushed into the ocean and didn't know whether to sink or swim. Memories rushed in, crashing over her like waves. The sound of Daniel's laughter in their backyard, the way he clung to her leg on his first day of school, the bedtime stories, the way he whispered, "I love you, Mama," before falling asleep. Had that Daniel ever existed? Could it be the same person who just walked away without looking back? Her fingers trembled as she held tighter to the bag in her lap. Her entire world, her home, her husband's memory, her identity had been left behind for this new beginning. But there was no beginning. There was only this. A woman of 61, abandoned in an unfamiliar airport, with no phone to call, no one waiting, no way home. Miguel tried to comfort her, offered a quiet room to sit in. But how do you comfort someone who has lost not just a person, but the meaning behind everything they gave up for them? This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a shattering of the soul, a tearing of roots, a betrayal by blood. And in that terrible stillness, Rosa realized something. Sometimes the greatest loss doesn't come from death. It comes from the living, from the ones who choose to walk away. Not because they have to, but because they want to, because they believe you are no longer worth turning around for. She looked out the glass windows of the airport, watching planes lift off into the gray sky. Like Daniel, they disappeared into the clouds, leaving only silence behind. But Rosa didn't scream. She didn't beg. The tears came slowly, but her face stayed calm. Because deep inside, something had broken beyond repair. But in that silence, there was also clarity. Perhaps for the first time in a long while, Rosa understood the bitter truth of life. Sometimes we have no one left but ourselves. Part 5. Miguel and Elena, a ray of light in the darkness. Just when Rosa thought the whole world had turned its back on her, a hand reached out. Not with noise or grand gestures, but with quiet warmth. It was Miguel, the airport security officer, a man who didn't just see an old woman sitting silently in the corner of a terminal, but saw the grief behind her tired eyes. He didn't ask too many questions. He didn't offer cliches. He simply said, "Don't worry, Señora. I won't leave you here alone." And so a different journey began. Miguel took Rosa to his home, a modest house but full of life, where he lived with his wife, Elena. Elena was a rare kind of woman. From the first moment she saw Rosa, she didn't treat her like a stranger. She embraced her like someone long lost and finally found. No interrogations, no pity, just a soft presence that made Rosa feel, for the first time in ages, that she still mattered to someone. That first evening, Elena made her a warm cup of tea and prepared chicken soup that smelled like comfort and memories. Nobody mentioned the airport. Nobody asked about the son who had left her behind. Instead, they created a space quiet and safe enough for Rosa to breathe again, not through tears, but through stillness. That night, Rosa slept deeply. No dreams. No waking up to the echo of her own loneliness. Miguel found her an old but clean sweater. Elena folded her clothes with care and placed them neatly in a drawer. Every little act, every gentle word, they were like sunlight falling on dry, forgotten soil. No one promised to fix her life, but their simple kindness began to mend something inside her that she thought was lost forever. Each morning, Elena invited her to share breakfast at their table. Miguel would tell small stories from work, some silly, some sweet, and once in a while, Rosa smiled. A real smile. She had forgotten what that felt like. Soon, she started helping Elena tend to the small flowers on their porch. She talked about the garden her late husband used to care for. The painful memories she once kept locked away slowly became stories shared, lighter, easier to carry. No one could replace the things Rosa had lost. Her old house, her beloved husband, the son who once meant everything. They remained tucked in her memory. But with Miguel and Elena, she was reminded of something else. This world isn't just made up of those who leave us behind. It's also filled with quiet hearts who open their doors. Not because they must, but because they care. And in that darkest chapter of Rosa's life, a small light flickered on. It wasn't bright, but it was warm. It didn't erase the past, but it reminded her that she hadn't lost everything. As long as there's a place where someone welcomes you with their heart, hope is never truly gone. Even after everything breaks, it's still possible to begin again, even if it's late, even if it hurts. Part 6. The Tragic News from Flight Q78. One quiet afternoon, as the sun tilted low across the edge of the old roof, Miguel returned home, but something was different. His steps were slower, his shoulders heavier. The usual warmth in his voice was absent, replaced by a silence that seemed to echo through the house. Elena noticed it instantly, but said nothing. Rosa, sitting peacefully on the wicker chair by the porch, gazing at the open sky, felt the shift in the air like a storm approaching with no thunder. Miguel sat across from her and gently took her wrinkled hand in his. He hesitated for a long while, his voice trapped somewhere between duty and compassion. Finally, with a tremble that betrayed his calm exterior, he spoke. "Rosa, there's something you need to know. Flight Q78, the one Daniel boarded that day, it crashed. Off the coast. No one survived." The world stopped. Time stilled. No words came. Rosa didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't do what the world might expect from a grieving mother. She simply closed her eyes, softly, as though flipping through 1,000 memories stored in the quiet corners of her heart. Every letter he wrote, every unanswered phone call, every long night spent waiting, they all came rushing back like waves, crashing and receding in the same breath. But she did not blame him. There was no longer room for anger. She had spent years grieving a living son who had already walked away. Now the loss was final. No hope of return. No apology coming. And yet, she found something almost sacred in that finality. No more waiting. No more wondering. Just a quiet release. With her hand resting over her chest, her voice barely a whisper, she murmured, "I hope you found peace, Daniel." Elena wrapped her arms around her. Miguel lowered his gaze, feeling as though he had just delivered the final blow to a heart already bruised by life. And yet, Rosa did not break. The sorrow was deep, yes, but it didn't crush her, because maybe, just maybe, she had already begun to let go long before the plane ever left the ground. And in that painful moment, she didn't find an ending. She found release. The kind that comes not from forgetting, but from forgiving, quietly, through tears, and above all, through love. Part 7. Starting a New Life. Mornings in Miguel and Elena's home began gently, with the warm scent of coffee wafting through the air, birds chirping just beyond the garden, and Rosa's quiet footsteps as she made her way to the kitchen. It was a far cry from the long, heavy silences that used to echo through her old home in Galicia. This place didn't just offer shelter. It breathed a new kind of warmth, not from the walls, but from the people within. At first, Rosa felt like a guest, hesitant to take up space in a life that wasn't hers. But Elena, always kind and patient, welcomed her not with grand gestures, but with the everyday things that make a house feel like home, inviting her to cook, to water the garden, to sit and talk about little things. Miguel, quiet but steady, showed his care in silent ways, carrying heavier groceries so she wouldn't have to, bringing her a chair when the sun felt too harsh, listening even when he didn't speak. One afternoon, the three of them sat in the garden, the sunlight dancing in their teacups. Rosa began to speak, at first softly, but then with a kind of voice that carried memories rather than words. She told them about her youth, about Javier, about the springs in Galicia, when the wind carried the scent of magnolias and promises. Elena leaned in, her eyes full of empathy. Miguel, as always, listened, quietly but deeply. What grew between them was not bound by blood, but by something far more resilient. Shared moments, quiet understanding, and open hearts. Rosa no longer referred to the place as their house. One day, without thinking, she called it our home. No one corrected her. No one needed to. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a quiet surrender of the heart. She had lost so much. Her husband, her son, her past. But in the ashes of everything she thought was over, she found something unexpected. A beginning. Not as someone's mother, not as someone's wife, but simply as Rosa, a woman with stories, with laughter, with love still left to give, and people who wanted to receive it. Part 8, A New Meaning. Community and sharing. No one could have imagined that the same woman who once sat silently by the window each morning, clutching her late husband's old handkerchief, would become the heart of an entire community. It was Elena, ever thoughtful and gentle, who first suggested it. Rosa, there's a community center nearby. They host small gatherings. Would you like to go? Rosa nodded, not out of curiosity, but because she had come to trust the woman who had pulled her from the edge. At first, she merely sat in the back, listening quietly. But one day, someone brought up food from their childhood. Rosa's eyes lit up. Memories came flooding back, recipes, aromas, laughter, and suddenly she had something to say. She started sharing, carefully, sherbajur, like adding just enough salt to a stew. And people listened, not just to her words, but to her presence. The young came to learn her seafood soup. The elderly came to hear stories of winters in Galicia, of buttered toast, of long-lost love. People began calling her Doña Rosa, not because of her age, but out of respect. One afternoon, a young woman stayed behind after a cooking session. She took Rosa's hand and whispered, "You should write your story down. It's not just your story, it's ours too." Part 9. Writing Memories. A Journey to Healing. That suggestion stirred something deep within Rosa. One quiet night, as the wind rustled through the garden, She opened an old drawer, pulled out a faded notebook, and began to write. The first lines were about joy, the scent of her son's hair as a child, the laughter of Javier echoing through the kitchen. Then came the losses, the betrayals, the aching silence. But in the end, gratitude found its place too. Writing wasn't just about remembering. It was a way to strip away the dust of years and meet herself with honesty. Every page, every word was a small step away from pain and toward peace. One day, Miguel noticed the notebook on the kitchen table. He didn't read it. Instead, he left a small note beside it. It said simply, "When you're ready, I'd love to listen." No pressure, no intrusion, just a gentle invitation filled with love and respect. Part 10. Family isn't always blood time past. Rosa no longer counted the days in Miguel and Elena's home. It had become her home in every sense of the word. One weekend morning, Elena invited Rosa to the garden. "Let's plant something new," she said with a smile. "Every flower we choose can mark a new memory." Rosa chose marigolds, in memory of Javier, lavender, for the scent of a long-lost scarf, and rosemary, because it reminded her of the first meal she ever shared with Miguel and Elena. Later that afternoon, Miguel handed her a small gift, a photo frame. In it was a picture of the three of them, Rosa holding a trowel, dirt on her cheek, beaming. Underneath it, he had written, "Our Rosa, our family." Tears welled up in her eyes, not from sorrow, but healing. Not from pain, but from a heart finally mended by something she thought she'd lost forever. Genuine, unconditional love. Part 11. The ending. Peace and light. As the months passed, Doña Rosa became a cherished part of the neighborhood. Her name echoed not just in cooking classes, but in community storytelling nights. People came not just for recipes, but for warmth, for love, for hope, for memory. She still remembered Daniel, but she no longer saw the man who abandoned her at the airport. In her mind, he was once again the little boy running barefoot through the backyard, giggling, hands sticky with jam, asking, "Mom, what are we eating tomorrow?" One peaceful evening, during a year-end gathering, someone asked, "Doña Rosa, if you had to sum up your life in one sentence, what would it be?" She smiled gently and after a pause said, "I lost a son, but I found something even more precious. Love, respect, and a true home." Life isn't always gentle. Sometimes it breaks us, not to destroy us, but to open us, so that light can enter. There are losses that feel permanent. An old home, a loved one, the trust we once held in family. And yet, in our emptiest moments, something miraculous can still appear. Just like Rosa, abandoned in despair, only to be embraced with unconditional love, she came to understand that family isn't just blood. It's where the heart is truly seen and held. If you're walking through a dark season, believe this. Somewhere, a door is quietly opening for you. Thank you for listening to Kunzy Podcast English. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next journey. Real stories that may awaken something deep inside you.